True, and that's what makes it even sadder. The system said, dishing out an absolute comeback, and Ryuk's expression plummeted. Hurricane energy doesn't just let you poof out techniques just because you can feel them. I can poof out a void vortex though? Yes, but that's because you have a void grimoire which is present in your Echo library. You already have the source energy of void vortex, which is void apex energy. That's why you can poof it. Throne Shift is a nullic skill that uses abyssal energy. Do you have an abyssal energy grimoire in your Echo library? The system asked, which finally helped him grasp the logic. So I need an abyssal energy source to activate an abyssal energy skill, huh? Yes, fool. It said, not forgetting to slam him once more. TSK. This is more complicated than I thought. It is. And that's why maybe you should have thought twice before flushing your null bloodline. It rubbed, to which Ryuk merely shrugged off. What's gone is gone. No need to regret. Not like I regret having two all-knowing entities who I suspect were harboring something evil gone from my soul space. What I need, on the other hand, is an abyssal energy source, he muttered to himself, his mind drifting to who could possess abyssal energy here in Amamura. But he didn't have to think twice before it occurred to him. Oh, those assassins. They used some dark energy with an aura similar to abyssal energy. And I just happened to spare one of them back then. He remembered the assassin he had kept alive. In an instant, he ordered, "Open Void Rift." And immediately, a rift opened right beneath Ryuk's toes, and he stepped into it, disappearing into thin air a moment later. Darkness trailed for a moment, but when it cleared, he was back in a familiar space. Yet not even a millisecond had passed before. The sound of heavy chains clanking echoed around him. He turned to his surroundings, only to find gigantic dark chains lurking all around him, oozing with an ominous energy. And then, "Death Lock!" The voice boomed from all around the enclosed space. The void around Ryuk compressed unbearably tight, and in an instant, the hanging chains silently folded inward, converging on Ryuk. He was instantly bound. Rounds and rounds of dark chains wrapped around his body. His arms were locked down, his neck wound tightly, and before he could even react, the sharp sound of space being sliced rang out. When he looked forward, just an inch from his face, he saw it. The glinting, razor-sharp aura of a sickle-like blade hovered near his nose. It was so sharp that a thin line quietly opened on Ryuk's skin, and from it, milky white blood began to trail down. He had been cut merely by the weapon's aura. And the one holding the blade? The dark elf assassin. Eyes blazing with crimson. Face twisted with pure murder. Silence reigned between them. One locked down, the other armed. Yet the one who spoke first was shocking. I'm just here to ask if I could borrow some abyssal energy, Ryuk said casually. Like the ones those nulls use. The elf's eyebrows twitched. Or maybe if you've got an abyssal energy core or something? Ryuk added, only for the sickle to press even closer, now steadily resting on his skin. Half a millisecond, and my blade'll slice through your brain. Kid? The elf growled. Might be a good time to start begging for mercy, or capitalizing on the fact you're young, and should be spared. Ryuk scoffed in disdain at the hypocrisy. The elfy princess you tried to assassinate was young, but you still tried to kill her. She's 24? The elf snapped back, and Ryuk's expression dropped. I thought she was 16 or something. And the first rule of an occult guard: never get your feelings involved. It was an occult mission to assassinate a princess of the royal family. I signed up for it. Did they tell you whether the person you'd guard was young or not when you accepted your mission? The elf asked in return. Hey! Don't lump us in the same shoes, Ryuk barked. You're a killer. I'm a guard. An archguard. We don't do the same thing. You're new to all this obviously. Your foolishness can be excused, the assassin said before shrugging it off, his blade now pressing tighter to Ryuk's skin. Now tell me, who are you? Where am I? And more importantly, how do I get out of here? Ryuk stared back at him with drooping eyes. At least look at me if you're expecting an answer, he muttered. The dark elf raised an eyebrow. I am looking at you, you piece of... He paused. His eyes widened. His voice. It came from behind me, he realized, shock overtaking him. And in an instant, the Ryuk bound in chains began to shimmer. Faded. The elf snapped his head backward, only to find another Ryuk seated leisurely on a dark floating platform across the void. How? The elf gasped. Ryuk sat casually, unbothered. Yet what horrified the assassin was that the chains that were supposed to be binding him were still there. Still floating, untouched. Still wrapped in the same shape. They hadn't been cut or broken. Yet Ryuk had escaped. He had just phased out of them. He's fast. Horrifyingly fast. The realization occurred to him, but it didn't bring relief. It only brought even more fear and horror, causing him to tighten his grip on the blade. An act that didn't escape Ryuk's notice. Even when you had me in chains, Ryuk said, you still couldn't cleave that blade through me. You think now that I'm free, you have a chance at all? TCH. Don't get cocky, kid. Whatever, Ryuk shrugged. I already got what I came for anyway. He turned his eyes toward his tattoos, watching them now blacken. Wait, isn't that my abyssal energy? How did he... By being tied with the abyssal chains, they had come in contact with him, and Ryuk's tattoos instantly adapted to the aura of those chains, temporarily granting him access to abyssal energy. You only have 30 seconds before it fades. The system panel flashed right before him, as his eyes gleamed with light. Well, see you later, he said, and immediately, a rift opened beneath his legs. He fell through, disappearing from the space once more. The instant Ryuk vanished, the assassin's knees collapsed onto the void floor, both sickle blades dissolving from his hands. His lips parted wide, drawing in white, chilling steam, his eyes dilated in fear. I can't beat him. It was the final realization that crossed his mind. Standing before that young man gave the same sensation as standing before death itself. Except, unlike death, who would strike swiftly with clear murderous intent, the one before him was so lax, it was terrifying. It was like standing before a baby, giggling innocently while holding a loaded gun to your skull. That creeping terror, that fear of what is possible and what is to come. How do I get out of this? When Ryuk reappeared on his bed, his tattoos still bore the dark abyssal energy. Without wasting a single second, he lay himself, crawling under the mattress and switching off the lamp. Once his eyes closed, he focused on recalling that feeling, and once he felt it was locked in, he gave the order. True skill. Abyssal close, twin thrones of the abyss, throne shift. The moment he issued the command, his eyes gently fell shut. His heartbeat slowed, and just moments later, his consciousness was successfully transferred out of his cozy bedroom. It hadn't been 10 seconds before the dark motes of light in his tattoos faded, returning to their shimmering purple hue. This isn't the spacecraft. That was the first thought Ryuk had when he found himself back in his main body. What unsettled him most was that, despite his high sensory perception, it was completely silent. No sound, no movement, no breath of life. The space was so pitch dark that he doubted if his eyes were even open. He couldn't see himself, and worse, he felt bound. His hands were suspended above his head, his legs folded and chained. Seems like something really went wrong, he thought, receiving a "told ya" from the system. Okay, I need to get out of here, wherever here is, he concluded while immediately ordering, activate Beyonder Dragon. The second he did, the hurricane runes on his body flared with shimmering purple energy, but only for a second. A powerful suction force engulfed them. He raised his neck against the chain tightening around it, then turned his gaze toward the chain binding his wrists. It radiated a strange colorless energy. In an instant, He focused and watched as the purple light of his tattoos began shifting. Within less than 3 seconds, the purple runes turned completely colorless, adapting to the energy of the chains. And the moment they did, the chains lost their suppression, allowing the Beyonder Dragon technique to activate. When it did, power flooded every inch of him. 6 crystal shards slipped out from the void and arranged themselves like a floating crown around his head. White scales covered his skin, and with a forceful yank, he shattered the chains binding his wrists. His freed hands moved to his neck, crushing the chains holding them, then moved to his legs, yanking those off as well. And finally, he stood. A rotating red beam began spinning rapidly across the chamber, followed by a loud, shrieking alarm. "Looks like they know I've broken out," Ryuk muttered as he rose to his feet. Crack! The sound of his bones shifting echoed through the silent void. Told him everything, he'd likely been held here for a while. "I hope this isn't another one of those damned pirate ship," he thought, descending onto the cold metallic floor. There was a clear exit door below. He glanced around. He was the only one imprisoned here. Even after a minute passed, no one rushed in. There was no familiar rushing footsteps or shouting, just the blaring red alarm, and it unnerved Ryuk a bit. "Maybe they're waiting for me to step out," he thought, as he moved toward the exit. But the moment he took his third step, Ryuk froze, his foot halting just an inch from the ground. His body stiffened. His heart pounded violently as, once again, his body triggered an emergency alert that flooded his mind. A millisecond later, Ryuk's neck jerked to the side, cleanly resting on his left shoulder. The sound of space being sliced into nothingness ripped through the air. A beam, so fast his sight could barely keep up, blitzed past his head and slammed into the wall ahead. When it did, the area that was once a sealed exit had been cleaved open completely, and most disturbing of all, even after 3 full seconds had passed, space refused to heal. It had been scarred. Permanently. What the hell? Ryuk turned in shock, his gaze instinctively shooting upward, toward where the blade came from. The entire ceiling above was torn apart by that strike, exposing the outside battlefield. And what he saw nearly made his jaw drop. Blades of energy were cross-slicing through the sky. Skyscrapers were being cleanly sheared off, followed by violent explosions that blew buildings into nothing. The sheer aura pouring from the battle chilled him to the bone, and he realized something. These aren't Apocrypha stage cultivators. These are Exignis cultivators. The sword beam that almost took off his head was nothing more than a stray attack that veered off track. And what's more, there were 100 of those sword beams veering erratically through the sky. Instantly, Ryuk dashed through the exit as the realization echoed in his mind. Void and Isha won't survive a slash like that. He dashed out through the exit, his senses sharpening as he tried to reconnect with their minds. Isha? Isha? Void? The connection. It's too faint. Ryuk muttered to himself as he raced through the floor he was on. He had called Isha and Void's names more than a dozen times, yet received no reply. The connection he felt with them was incredibly weak, so faint it couldn't even allow him to narrow down their location or state. What's more, the floor he was on felt like an endless hallway that didn't go anywhere. There were countless rooms, but not a single soul. He had checked some of them, and all he found were large cylindrical pods filled with green fluid, each containing some strange being. They weren't what he was looking for, so he ignored them. Deactivate Beyonder Dragon. Activate King's Aura, he ordered, and in an instant, the glass-like shards around his head and the white scales recoiled, replaced by a deep blue flame that flickered from the depths of his eyes. Immediately, the aura spread forward across the entire area. Ryuk stopped in his tracks, eyes closed. Though his body remained still, the blue flame began to billow outward violently, reaching a mind-numbing level of intensity. The sounds of the surrounding glass pods bursting echoed around him, but he paid them no attention as his senses expanded madly. And then, after 10 seconds of pure silence, I can feel her above me. Boom! A massive crater formed where Ryuk had formerly stood as he blasted upward at terrifying speed. His fist clenched tight, and he slammed it into the ceiling above. Space rippled beneath the impact as the entire floor above shattered apart. He landed on the upper floor only for him to crouch to the ground, and he leaped once more. Boom! One floor after the next ruptured as he continued rising, blasting through the 3rd, 7th, 12th, until finally he slammed into the 15th floor. Ha! Gasps of shock echoed through the room as Ryuk's figure landed before a group of blue-skinned humanoids in white lab coats, each of them turning toward him in alarm. The moment he landed, Ryuk could feel the connection much clearly now. Yet what he saw made his breath catch. His eyes trembled. Ah! Sounds of deep, sharp exhales rang out from his lips, worsening with each passing second. Right before him, lined across the room, were rows of the same 10-meter-tall cylindrical pods filled with green fluid. Some had cracked open, and scientists were using mechanical arms to drag various bestial creatures into containment. But Ryuk's eyes locked onto something else entirely. A frost hydra head suspended in a pod filled with green fluid. And when he turned to another pod in the room, he found another frost hydra head, and another that contained 2 massive, feathered wings. Isha. The name echoed in his mind like a thunderclap. These divided body parts belonged to Isha. His Isha. What have you done? The words were a whisper. Yet every single glass pod in the room shattered into nothing as Ryuk slowly turned toward the scientists. Wait, isn't that the slumbering test subject number 0? One of the scientists recognized, eyebrows furrowing in alarm. What is he doing here? Wasn't he locked up? They were saying when everything suddenly paused. Each of them froze in sheer panic as, all of a sudden, color drained from the world. All around them, reality distorted into a crimson hue, giving way to a dark dimension of blood-red light that covered the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything. And at the center of it all, a lone figure stood, cloaked in shifting purple, flickering in and out of existence. What have you done? His voice was like metal grinding against metal, resonating through every inch of their bones. Each one of them knew in their conscience that a monster had awakened, sending forth a nightmarish aura that should never have been. Kill him! Kill him now! One of them screamed as glowing runic lines erupted throughout the lab, magic circles activating at once, flaring violently toward Ryuk. Hidden compartments in the walls flew open, revealing hidden machinery and turrets that began firing without pause. Kaboom! The world gave way for him, silently, forcefully, and then a rain of blood showered the room. Screams of horror rang out like banshees. No! Brain matter and blood splashed through the air as a head was crushed into its own chest. Wait! Wait! Let me! A scientist screamed in terror, backing away, but then a bloodied claw erupted from his chest. Then another hand burst through his stomach. PLE. He hadn't finished the word when the space between his waist widened, split down the middle, followed by his mouth and finally his face. 1 second later, he was ripped in two, intestines gushing like a broken tap. Monster! Call the boss! The other scientists screamed in horror, backing away from the glowing purple monster before them. His hands were soaked in blood, crouching atop a pile of at least a dozen corpses. Ah! A deep exhale of purple steam left his lips as he slowly turned to them. His entire face was covered in squirming purple veins, making him look even more hideous and terrifying. Call him! Call the boss! One of them screamed, and it was his last word, as a punch tore through his head and exploded the top half of his body like a balloon. Agonized screams rang out, but Ryuk didn't stop. He tore through every single one of them. They fired spells, bullets, blasts of mana, but all that rained down on him only delayed the slaughter. He pressed forward, unstoppable, relentless, merciless. They were soon reduced to 5. Please! One of the 5, a female scientist, tried to beg, but she collapsed into herself, her body erupting with blood and organs like a burst watermelon. The same scene played out again and again until only one was left. Ryuk's hand reached forward, gripping the last female scientist by the head as his claws pierced into her skull. His voice came again, low and demonic. "What have you done?" Her body repeatedly quaked in horror, trembling beneath the crushing pressure of his grip and the suffocating monstrous aura. "Isha. It's Isha, right? She's alive. She's still alive. She's on the 25th lab mythic room. Please spare." Her chest caved in, a hand pierced through her heart, and ripped open a gigantic hole that revealed the other side of the lab. All Roselert felt was a searing pain that clouded her vision, and then she was tossed like trash across the room. Red blood spilled from her eyes, and the last thing she saw was the purple monster bursting through the floor as the ground gave way, unleashing a shockwave that rippled her corpse into fragments. And even in death, all she could remember were the red tears sliding down the monster's cheek. Within a door tagged Holocaust Sector Lab 9, the whirring sound of machinery could be heard, coming from forklift-like machines that picked up bodies from cylindrical pods, filled with blue serums. Creatures, missing one body part or another, were being heaved from the pods by these forklifts and kept in huge cones whose height lowered to the size of a football once they were successfully stored. They said the base is under attack from an unknown powerful group. Yes, I can hear some weird explosions too. I'm curious how strong the invading organization is if they can make the base swiftly order an abandonment. Murmurs could be heard here and there. "Silence, all of you. More work, less talk." A man who stood close to the door of the lab barked out loud at the lab workers handling the creatures. "These specimens are secretive L.V3 complexity organisms. No harm unless designated must happen to them, so make sure to handle them very well." The man is a stark contrast to the others, as while everyone else in the room wore lab coats, he was the only one wearing a combat suit. Surrounding him were various other scientists who had tablet-like devices in their hands going around the lab. "TCH, those anomaly bastards. Talk of a bad time to strike," he muttered angrily under his breath. "Hopefully, the boss holds them out long enough for us to evacuate the majority of the living specimens at least. There's also the dungeon prisoners that are still yet to be transported. And that sleeping dude in floor 0. TCH. There's still so much to do." Leo thought to himself, his fingers moving to his eyebrows and rubbing them. He was never someone who loved impromptu rushes, and the mere thought of the responsibility placed on his neck right now was enough to give him a headache. But then the rubbing paused. Ha! He could faintly hear it. The sound of something tumultuous beneath his feet. Did those idiots lose control of a sentient body part? TCH fools. He turned towards the exit to check out what was happening, but stopped when the sound is getting louder and louder. When he looked at the ground, he noticed it suddenly beginning to reverberate. No! Something is blasting through the floors. The realization hit him, and just a second later, Luo snapped his head behind him in shock, only to be faced with the scene of some of the forklifts having been sent flying into the air, the shocked gasps of the scientists who rode them, and most of all, the new figure, a humanoid-looking purple-tattooed monster coated in abnormally huge purple veins. The gravitational force acted, pulling them all back to the ground as everyone in the room watched the monster land on the hard floor, sending another deep reverberation. What is that?" one of the scientists muttered in shock. But Leo was already 3 steps into thinking. The most notable feature of this new entrance, apart from the thick veins all over him, was the shimmering purple tattoos, hidden beneath another halo of flaming blue. The blue tattoo released a strange aura that caused most of the sleeping beast-like specimens in the pods to stir from their rest. "Wait, those purple tattoos," he muttered beneath his breath. "It's him. It's the slumbering dude from floor 0. He woke up?" he thought in shock. But he was forced to recoil from the shock when the demonic whisper echoed through the room. "I... Ash... A..." Ryuk could feel it. The world around him was of a red hue like crimson blood covering his gaze, and within this crimson were the standing blue halos. But through it all he could feel it, that familiar heartbeat. It led to the name escaping his lips, and a moment later his neck turned to the side. Then he took a step forward. Kaboom! A mini explosion followed as the floor gave way, and he tore through this world of red. On his way, he was faced with one of the blue-haloed beings, but it never occurred to him to dodge out of its way. He ran straight through him, and horror appeared on the faces of the lab scientists when they watched the purple monster collide with the lead scientist, blowing him into a red mush of blood that splattered through the room, staining the rest in a color of red. The lead scientist, their leader not only in intelligence but in strength, had been run through and exploded into mush upon contact with the purple monster. The rest needed no words before screams of horror filled the room, and the scientists immediately rushed toward the exit. "Nobody leaves!" Luo screamed out the order, but it fell on deaf ears. The terrified lab scientists rushed out toward him, pushing him aside as they all raced out of the room. They had just watched their lead professor get blown apart like balloon mush by a purple monster radiating murderous intent and an unknown power level. And they were expected to stay in the room? 10 seconds later, there was only Leo in the room. A part of him felt the urge to run as he stared at the exit, but in the end, when the image of a particular man flashed in his head, that madman, he had no choice but to instead chase after Ryuk, his body rippling forth with incredible energy. The boss orders must be completed. Ryuk could feel the growing connection as he moved through the various pods, and soon enough, he was before a particular pod. One thrice as big as the others, filled with a blank serum that blinded his gaze from whatever was stored within, but he could say for sure. Immediately, his claw reached out, slamming against the pod. It only left a crack, but after 3 more strikes, the metal gave way as his hands reached into the helm and he pulled it apart. The dark serum came flying out, raining on him, leading to sizzling sounds, but he cared not for it. His gaze turning to the creature held within the pod. A one-headed beast, which had 2 of its necks seemingly having been cleanly shaved off. Its wings were no more, making it resemble a serpentine creature compared to a draconic one, but Ryuk was sure of it. It was Isha. When he arrived before her, her eyes slowly opened, and as he stepped forward, her maw moved. "Behind you!" The sound made was that of a blade piercing through him from behind, erupting out the front. A line of blood poured down his right lip, but then he slowly turned his head, and Leo looked into an eye that screamed of murder and madness. "Go away!" The words reverberated continuously through his head as he drew back his long spear, stepping backward nearly 100 meters. "Ha!" He turned to the sight of the monster beginning to shift. The heinous purple veins that lined his skin slowly began to retreat, making him appear much leaner. Has he exhausted his energy? Hey, system, Ryuk asked, returning to his normal state, his glitching existence halting to a stop. A Hydra's head cannot be easily recovered with normal serums. Ryuk, you need very high-grade healing serums, each costing more than 100,000 points. Maybe, I don't care, buy it? He replied, and instantly, a prism covered in various runic lines appeared in his hands. The lines trailed across all its edges as it radiated a scintillating frosty white light. Ryuk stepped forward, the chains that held Isha shattering into nothing, and then he moved to her maw, crushing the prism. From within, a frosty white serum mixed with rainbow-like motes rained down into her mouth. Once he finished using the healing serum, he stepped back. Silence covered them for a few seconds before Ryuk watched Isha's serpentine eyes widen to their limit, rainbow tears dripping from them, and then, roar! A heart-pounding roar burst out from her maw, and a rainbow light exploded from her body. It slammed into the surrounding cage with power, bursting the cylindrical iron box completely open, before it continued toward Ryuk and slammed against him. Yet he stood his ground easily, eyes focused solely on her. Quickly enough, it all began to grow back. The cleanly sliced necks of Isha began reforming, as did the heads on them. Her ripped-out scales began glowing with a rainbow light, and he watched as they regenerated. Claws reappeared once more, the severed wings bursting out. The rainbow mist disappeared, soon giving way to a thick, colossal creature whose mere existence enveloped the room in a nerve-wracking chill. But Isha only remained in place for 1 second before she vanished. The air flapped violently around him, blowing Ryuk's hair in all directions. Then, the entire temperature of the room further dropped by thousands of degrees. Leo was only brought out of his shock when he felt the pillar of ice blasting toward him. Immediately, he shot back with speed, his hand tightly gripping the spear, which burst out with a flaming red light before his arm jerked backward and he pierced forward toward the pillar. The spear tore through, slashing the beam in two. A beast only at the ancestral level still isn't my match. Fool, he thought. Yet his smirk retreated from his lips when his backward motion came to an instant stop when he felt something rip through him from behind. His eyes flashed in horror, looking down at his chest, where 3 gigantic claws had ripped out of him his heart, having been crushed into nothing by it. How? It's only an ancestral-level beast, he muttered, as mist and blood rained down. The sound of footsteps echoed from the front as Ryuk slowly stepped forward. Leo turned his head, stunned. Isha retracted her claws, leading to Leo collapsing to the ground. He died staring into Ryuk's blank gaze. Seems like her 200% increase in strength from you activating King's Aura is really effective. The system notification flashed. Right now, Ryuk had King's Aura on, and one of its effects was increasing the attack power of his contracted beasts by 200%. Isha was at the ancestral level, which sat at a base power level of 500 to 1000. With her getting a 200% boost, her power level tripled, placing her firmly within the 1500 to 3000 range. It was a power level solid enough to qualify her as Apocrypha level. Good to see you too, Isha, Ryuk said aloud, hugging the frost head before him. Now tell me, where is Void? He asked. She turned her head behind her, and Ryuk followed her gaze, slowly turning upward. Seems like they can sense each other better than I can sense them, he muttered. But just before he prepared to lift off, he felt Isha turn her attention to the various prisms in the room. Hey, Ryuk, she called telepathically. Yes. Can we bring with us all the specimens in this room? They contain extinct or anomaly-level existential beasts. It's a waste to leave them here and let them all die. Ryuk turned his head. There were some prisms where the beasts in the various cylinders had already been transported. But there were still some cylinders locked. Whatever was inside them was concealed. Okay, he replied, and immediately began going through the various cylinders, ripping them open one by one and placing the beast specimens into the prisms. There were some bestial entities so bizarre that they took his breath away, but he had no time to look at them deeper. He simply stored them all in the prisms. Once he was done, I've placed them all in shops, the system replied. Thank you, Isha said telepathically to him. While Ryuk didn't know why Isha wanted to save these beasts, since she rarely showed much interest in other beasts like her, he also thought leaving such high-level beasts to die here was a waste. In the next instant, Isha lowered herself, ushering him to get on. Once he climbed onto her, her 4 wings flapped. Immediately, they both burst through the room, tearing out of where they were and flying upwards with speed. Those damn bastards! You just wait till I get out of here. I'ma rip you all apart one by one. You bastards! Within a brilliantly lit spatial prison was none other than a void panther that paced around restlessly, baring its teeth at everything, including the stinging white lights that blocked all forms of its void manipulation abilities. And this creature was none other than Void. The lights in the space around him were incredibly bright and piercing to the eyes, but they weren't just piercing. They also disrupted Void's abilities, canceling out all of his Void powers and thus successfully locking him within this space for good. Tsich, those damn bastards. They think they can lock me in here forever? They think one day I'll lose my shit and go insane. Void asked in his head, to none in particular. Well, they're wrong. And I'm gonna show them how wrong they are by remaining here for 1,000 years, perfectly still. I'm gonna be untouched by this mundane cage like a god. You'll all see, he said proudly as he pranced around, until he suddenly stopped. Wait, why do I feel like I should have said those words out loud, and not in my head? He thought, eyes widening in horror. The poor Void Panther slumped to its butt after the thought, its claw rubbing its head slowly. Those bastards. They really are trying to keep me here forever, until my pathetic, useless death. He whispered, his paws trailing along the floor. To think I, the mighty Void, will die bitchless, just like that sleeping son of a bitch. He thought silently with the downcast expression of a frail old beggar, eyes turning up to look at the bright ceiling, only for it to flash coldly when he remembered. Wait, that sleeping son of a bitch is still sleeping even now. What the hell? Will that bastard remain asleep for all eternity? Void shouted, rising to his feet and pacing around the cage once more. I knew that bastard was up to something in that sleep of his. Humph, you bastard. I wish he'd wake up and find himself blown away by those green alien monsters. Really, Void? The voice was so loud that Void jumped off its feet in shock, every hair on his body standing on end. A moment later, the entire cage unraveled like nothing, giving way to a face that held world-ending anger, and by the side of that face, none other than a Hydra head which looked at Void in shame and disbelief. Oh, Ryuk. Long time no see. Has anyone told you you're looking gorgeous with those purple eyes? Void said quickly, trying to divert attention from his words. He failed. Well, I didn't mean it literally. I meant your ass being blown out by some high-level magic spell or something similar. He stammered, and although Ryuk's expression didn't change, it did manage to fool a person in the room though. Oh really? Isha asked, her Hydra head tilting with vibrant curiosity. Of course, Isha. What do you think I meant before? Void replied, raising an eyebrow as Isha slowly recoiled. Well, I thought it was one of those evil moves made by men. The kind sister Rakshasa told me about. She muttered shyly, and Ryuk finally lost it. His fiery expression melted down to his eyebrows twitching repeatedly. You both have lost it. He screamed so loudly that it echoed with sonic booms strong enough to make both beasts shut their ears in pain. Better save your strength, Void, Ryuk said, turning his back to the cat and jogging slowly toward the exit. Why is that? Void asked cluelessly. Because you're going to need it for our upcoming death battle. Ryuk spat coldly, making the puffed-up cat freeze on Isha's back. Is there a chance that I might be the one getting my ass blown out soon? Anyway, where are the rest? Ryuk asked as they exited the room, but the second they did, boom! An incredible force of energy blasted from above, slamming into the room and reducing everything to ashes, leaving something remaining. Wow, that's some huge ass, Void said uncontrollably, as Ryuk's eyebrow twitched. A being had landed on its butt in the very room Void was imprisoned in, blasting it into oblivion. It was a colossal titan whose height, even while sitting, was easily 300 meters. Their base is under attack, huh? Good for them, Void said cheerfully. Ryuk cleared his head and sped away from the scene. We need to get out of here, ASAP. I know where the rest are. They're locked up in the dungeons, Void explained. Ryuk glanced at him but didn't need to speak anymore, because a void portal opened before them. This should lead directly to their cell, Void added. But instead of Ryuk and Isha rushing in, they paused, turning to look at Void with a raised eyebrow. Just how did you know that? Void could read their confusion and explained with a wave of his paw. I was able to escape my cage a few times and got to know a couple of things about this place, before ultimately getting locked in. It was enough to erase their doubts, and the trio continued through the void vortex, disappearing within. When they reappeared, it was in a dark, putrid-smelling area, dimly lit, but just as Void had said, they were standing before a cell with chains that held 3 people inside. And those 3, looking quite disheveled, were none other than Antares, Rakshasa, and Elder Selene. Well, the big guy seems to have picked up a couple more scars on him. Now he's looking even fresher. Void noted, the second they arrived, eyeing Antares, who was covered in blood-red scars. His gauntlets had been completely broken, with only a few fragments hanging around his fingers. His upper cloth had been shredded into nothing, leaving only tattered shorts. What should have been trousers? Ryuk? The trio called, voice lit in disbelief and hope as they sighted him. The iron prison cell reverberated as Ryuk grabbed and pulled the bars to the side. His hands bulged with power, widening to double their size. But even though he used all his strength, a gasp of shock left his lips as he backed off. Tough. The irons are ridiculously tough? Hey Void, open a vortex inside that prison and get them out, Ryuk ordered, watching as Void raised his paw to them. But even after 5 seconds of blank staring, nothing happened. Wait, I must be getting rusty. Just give me 5 more seconds, Void said, stretching his second claw. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The space has been locked down. I can't open a portal in it. Oh, great! Ryuk unconsciously muttered beneath his lips as his hands grabbed the cell railings once more. But just before he could begin, he felt a hand wrap around his. It was none other than Rakshasa, who whispered, "There's no way around pulling apart these iron. Only someone at the Exygnus stage can." Ryuk paused. "I'm glad to see you got back, Isha. And Void," she added softly. "You 3, leave this place before worse things happen again." Ryuk's eyebrow quivered as he turned to look at Antares and Elder Selene. He watched as they gave him nods of reassurance. And then, he threw his head back, screaming, "All of you have lost it." The scream of annoyance made Rakshasa back away from the cage, while the others watched as Ryuk's hands gripped the iron so tightly, cracks ran across its surface. Activate Beyonder Dragon. The second the technique was activated, the sound of space warping around him echoed, while white scales rearranged themselves on his skin. His eyes glowed with blue light, and then, open! Like a divine command, the irons were forcefully pulled and bent apart by Ryuk, until a gigantic space was left in the middle, a scene that was unbelievable to the trio stuck within. They had been locked in here for months. Antares and Rakshasa, both at the Apocrypha stage, had done everything they could to break the cage. Yet they had failed continuously until they eventually gave up, accepting their fate of eventually rotting here. But right now, there was a massive opening just before them. "The base is under attack, from some powerful force?" Ryuk called out, stepping into the cage and swiping his claw, tearing apart the chains that bind them. Void helped too, getting rid of some more, and soon enough each of the trio was free. "Whatever group that is, I want nothing to do with them, so we need to leave. Now!" Ryuk barked, jumping behind the colossal frost hydra. The trio followed, seating themselves behind him as Isha rose into the sky, shooting upwards moments later. "How's the spacecraft?" Ryuk asked, turning to look at Elder Selene, who shook her head sadly. "I don't. It's in the hangar," Void called out, opening a vortex right in front of them. "Good Void," Ryuk praised, only to tilt his head with a raised eyebrow as Void grinned slyly. "You're dreaming if you think I'm letting you off that easily," he said, resulting in the Void Panther smirking darkly. They were closing in fast on the vortex, when suddenly Ryuk's body went rigid. It was impossible not to notice, even Isha stopped an inch before the vortex. "Help me!" The voice rang directly in Ryuk's head, as he turned instinctively to look at the gloomy prison cells behind him. From deep within that place, something was calling. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked, turning to the group. They all raised an eyebrow, beholding confused expression. "Hear what?" Rakshasa asked. "Help me." "Ryuk," came again, this time shocking him to his very core. The voice didn't just sound like the cries of a female child. It carried with it a powerful effect that made the Beyonder dragon bloodline within him quiver with deep melancholy. His own heart sank from the sheer sadness. I'll be back in 10 seconds, he told them. Hey, didn't you say? Void started, trying to dissuade him, but before he could finish, he saw the image of Ryuk sitting beside him begin to disintegrate into fragments. An afterimage? Help me. Where are you? Ryuk called out, racing through the prison cells, flashing from one end to the other. He was frantic, trying to reach the source of the voice calling to him. The sound waves were too dispersed to be pinpointed clearly, so he had no choice but to check every cell. He had to find whomever possessed that voice. He checked cell after cell but still didn't find the one he was looking for. With no other option, he continued deeper and deeper into the prison, until finally, he found it. A wall. Not a cell, but a solid wall made of the same material as the previous prison bars. And not just that, there were restriction runic lines covering every inch of the wall. Help me. The voice echoed again, as Ryuk's claw slowly moved backward, hurricane energy glimmering on his fingertips. But just before he could strike, a notification flashed before him. Warning! Warning! Aura of an incredibly powerful but suppressed entity has been detected. Host is advised to avoid venturing into the unknown. Ryuk, whatever is inside this prison might very well be the most horrific thing you will ever face. It's not just bound with oblite or... It's wrapped in an entire wall, covered in high-grade suppression runes. That's more than enough of a sign this thing is beyond you. The system warned him gravely, but then, shockwaves rippled outward as Ryuk slammed his claw into the wall. A dent instantly appeared, but that was just the beginning. Wave after wave of explosions bombarded the wall as he chipped away at it, one strike at a time, until he finally tore a hole large enough for himself. The second he ripped through it, he disappeared into the space beyond. What he found was a room of complete white, and sitting at the center of it was a little girl. Long rainbow hair covered her face, concealing her features. Her hands were chained to the ground, chains that extended into the strange white world, each etched with suppressive runes. He stepped forward, one step at a time, and appeared before the girl. She reacted, slowly stirring. Ryuk bent to a knee, and her rainbow-colored hair shifted under his touch. He brushed them to the side to reveal her face. What he saw surprised him. A porcelain-white, oval-shaped face, with slight dark soot dusting her cheeks. Eyes of a rainbow hue, tears like shimmering crystals sliding down from them. She was the most gorgeous child Ryuk had ever seen. But the sadness in her expression broke him so deeply. His lips parted, his teeth grinding together. But that only lasted a second, before the grinding from anguish turned into a slowly widening grin. Your skill is really powerful, he whispered, rising to his feet. When Ryuk looked down at the floor beneath him, he saw it. Rainbow runic lines etched all over the ground, almost invisible to ordinary eyes. But he could feel it. This runic circle was responsible for the deep sympathy blooming in his chest, and none but the little girl sitting before him could have conjured it. She had wanted out of her imprisonment. She had lured him here, and enhanced his sympathy through the runic formation all over her cell. But now, Ryuk watched as the runes beneath his feet began to disperse, slowly recoiling back. Help me, Ryuk, please. She called out once more, her voice soft and trembling. Ryuk's brows furrowed. This was clearly a trap laid out for him. She had called him in a way only he could respond to, probably because she had somehow been able to witness how he had soused in saving his trio group earlier. But now, her dispersing the runic circle she conjured and then begging him for help? Was she merely manipulating him into freeing her chains? Or was she just another prisoner, desperate for freedom? The rumbling of the entire base, shaking like it was about to collapse, snapped him out of his thoughts. He knew then he needed to make a choice. He turned away, walking back toward the exit. But when he reached the end of the prison wall, again the rumbling filled the air. The walls cracked dangerously. This was a clear sign. The entire structure was about to fall. And then the thoughts returned to him again. Is ignoring the cry of someone asking for help really the best thing? Just because I felt manipulated? Can I really be cruel enough to watch her get buried alive, when I have the power to save her? And if I save her, would it be fair to only save her? What about the rest of the prisoners, doomed to die when I could have saved them too? The thought struck him deeply. He raised his scaly white hands to his face. He held power enough to save them all if he wanted. Yet, why had he doubted? Why hadn't he even considered saving the others until this one girl had called to him? A third rumble echoed out. Part of a wall collapsed and Ryuk moved. One step, he was gone from where he stood. The sound of chains being broken rang out next. Surprise covered the little girl's face as she brought her hands to her face. They were ugly red and mangled flesh around the wrists, wounded by the damage those chains had done to her. But now, she had been freed. A moment later, Ryuk picked her up into his arms. Wordlessly, he disappeared from what used to be her prison cell. All around them, other cells remained, with agonized screams echoing out from prisoners who could hear the walls of their prison crumbling. They knew it. Only certain death awaited them if the building truly collapsed, something which was eventually bound to happen soon enough. But just before their despair could settle in, a blur of light flashed past with stunning speed. Then, the sound of their prison cells being ripped apart resounded. At first, they thought it was an illusion, but when they felt the weight lifted from their bonds and stepped forward, realization struck them. We've been freed. A fourth, thunderous rumble shook the structure, reminding everyone that time was running out. Every prisoner began racing out of their shattered cells, bolting toward the prison exit. Ryuk's energy was exploding from him. His Beyonder Dragon skill and Sovereign Retribution skill activated to the max as he raced across rows of cells. He broke them, and broke them, and broke them until there was nothing left to break. By the time he was done, he could already see Isha's back up ahead. "Hey, you'll have to find your way out on your own," he began, looking down at the girl in his arms. But all he heard was her soft exhale. She'd fallen asleep. "I'm pretty sure I'll regret this," Ryuk muttered, grinding his teeth as he moved, appearing upon the Frost Hydra. "We leave now," he called out. Isha flew forward into Void's portal without a word. At the last moment, Ryuk saw the exit to the prison cell being broken and all the prisoners rushing out. Just 10 seconds after silence settled over the prison, completely collapsed. The falling walls, powered by gravity and destruction, held enough force to bury even a peak Apocrypha stage being to their death. A fate that about hundreds of prisoners in the building would have faced, had they not been freed. The hangar. Ryuk was bewildered when he arrived at the hangar, only to find an open grassland. A grassland that held millions upon millions of spaceships. It was the largest number of ships he had ever seen in a single location, each bearing a unique design, shape, and size, all of which were Traveler's ship. Just how many people did they kidnap? He wondered. Without wasting time, Isha flew forward at top speed, quickly arriving before a peculiar-shaped spaceship among the bunch. It was none other than the Snoardocraft, their spaceship, and with a single touch from Elder Selene, it recognized them. The group immediately poured in, the hatch sealing shut a moment later. Elder Selene got to work at once, rapidly tapping on holoscreens and controls. 10 seconds later, the engine thundered to life, the ship rising higher and higher into the air. Moments later, it burst forward with speed, rising toward the sky of this strange world. Hanging just above a colossal planet, nearly 3 times the size of Earth, were a total of 3 gigantic motherships, each about a couple of thousand kilometers away from the other. And not far away from these motherships, closer to the drawing gravitational force of the colossal planet, were a total of about a dozen experts standing in space, with their hands stretched forward toward it. The result of their actions? A golden barrier, streaked with runes all over, that extended outward, covering all the parts of the colossal world. It acted like a barrier that enveloped the entire planet. All of a sudden, a holographic display appeared right in the void, and on it showed the footage, the image of a sleek white ship that was approaching the golden barrier. A ship trying to escape? The words left the lips of one who suddenly appeared before the floating footage. It was a female, clothed in a sleek futuristic battle gown. Cold golden eyes, along with rapidly blowing metallic gold hair, even in space where not even the slightest breeze existed. Shoot it down. The words echoed beside her ears, coming from none other than the golden tattoo that crossed around her neck. With pleasure, she responded. A smirk grew on the lips of the lady as her hand slowly reached outward. Golden lights coalesced all over her palm, soon giving way to a gigantic, golden-colored bow. It arched like half a moon, its length from tip to tip being 3.5 meters, and its curved diameter unstrung was a clean 2.5 meters. This enormous bow, looking as big as a car, was easily held by the cold beauty, whose other hand stretched to the side and conjured another object. It was an arrow with a full length of 3 meters, and its head was as long as a short dagger. Just like the bow, hundreds of runes were carved all over its surface. As the arrow touched the string, a powerful burst of light rippled across the vast void of space. A beam of radiant gold followed, glowing from the bow and piercing straight through the barrier, casting its brilliant ray upon the approaching ship. She drew the bow back, the void quivering under the unreleased power, and when it reached its limit, a grin curved up her lips. Defy anomaly art. Golden piercer shot. The words echoed throughout the void of space, only to be silenced a moment later by the sound of it being completely ripped apart. Shockwaves bloomed out in succeeding circles as the arrow pierced forward with horrific power, furiously roaring toward the flying ship. Warning! 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 Within the Snowwardo craft, the alarms were blazing crazily, the lights in the room having been turned to red. A force capable of destroying the ship in its entirety has been processed. Please proceed to swerve out of its path in 2, 1. Path of severing too late. Please prepare for the ship's imminent destruction. The AI called out as Elder Selene tapped on buttons, resulting in the footage appearing. The footage of a golden starlight that was already on them, rippling forth amidst rings of shockwaves. What the hell? Void screamed out in shock, his hair standing on end as it felt the destructive aura that chilled it to its heart even from mere sighting. But a moment later, space before the nose of the ship was torn, giving way to a smooth vertical scar. A figure reached out from this space scar, racing forward toward the approaching starlight. This figure was none other than Ryuk, who had shards of blue slipped out of the void and around his head, followed by scales of white growing all over his exposed skin. The arrow appeared right before his nose a moment after he came out, yet in the next instant, about 10 afterimages appeared in the air behind him, showing how he had bent his head to the side, faintly dodging the arrow. But not only did he dodge, he grabbed it in his hands. A groan left Ryuk's lips as he felt the violent jerk that almost shattered his shoulder bone. Kaboom! Shockwaves burst forward with tremors as he slammed straight into 3 skyscrapers with terrifying speed. But he smiled in the end, having succeeded in twisting the path of the arrow away from the ship. His body continued slamming into skyscrapers, crashing and dragging him across the floor surface when his teeth ground together. And then, kaboom! An unending abyss opened right beneath his legs as he blinked away from reality. His body pierced forward with such speed that the entirety of space rippled after him. And the arrow, which had been dragging him down, was now held in his hand like a spear. Appearing by the side of the ship, his hands jerked backwards, the arrow held over his shoulder, and then, a fierce war cry rang out as the arrow soared through the air, hurtling toward its source with a speed 3 times greater than the one it had arrived with. And this time, it wasn't golden but a purple starlight that rushed into the void of space. What? The screams reverberated through the lips of the experts hanging in the golden sky as they watched the footage of the approaching arrow. But they didn't get to keep looking, because when they saw the piercing, shimmering purple starlight that rapidly raced forward toward them. The aura of it was so powerful and the shockwaves it brought so petrifying. They immediately recoiled their hands, jerking away from the barrier they were forming and fleeing into the distance. Ha! The sound escaped the lips of the lady who had sent forth the arrow, the unbelievable realization of her own arrow having been sent back towards her, hitting her a second too late. She took a step to the side to dodge. The sound of something being ripped apart rang out as the purple starlight roared straight through her right shoulder. Golden blood sprayed into the air, teeth grinding in pain as she was blown away into the barrier a moment later, and even the barrier itself collapsed into nothing as the approaching spacecraft through the open hole made by the arrow, instantly disappearing into the void of space a moment later. It happened so fast. Some of the experts stood like ghosts to the side, asking themselves, "What just happened?" "I think we can slow down now, Elder Selene." The words rang out through the pilot room of the spaceship, as Elder Selene's hand moved over a holograph and slowly dragged it down, in turn reducing its speed. Then, Essie switched the control mode to autopilot before tapping on a different hologram that changed the setting of the room from a pilot control area to a living room-like space. She was the first to collapse onto a nearby sofa, her spiraling heartbeat slowly returning to a serene rhythm. When Ryuk looked around the room, he realized he was perhaps the slowest. Everyone else had already settled in. Even Isha had changed into her human form and was sprawled comfortably on one of the couches. Antares had disappeared into his room, most likely to take a bath and get rid of the scanty clothing on him. That just left Ryuk standing, and eventually he also took a seat at the side, waiting for them all to catch their breath. They had all been imprisoned, faced with the reality that they could never escape and would rot to their death, only to be released. And just when they thought they were free, a flaming arrow had come their way, and the ship's AI had warned them to brace for destruction. The aura of that moment alone was enough to make them all believe they would die. Yet that certain death was thwarted, and now, after moving at full speed for 3 hours straight, they had escaped far enough to get a breathing space. The range of emotions they'd experienced without pause was enough to knock the very air from their lungs, and that explained the exhaustion. Ryuk himself relaxed onto a sofa. Even though his heartbeat wasn't thundering like the rest, he had been at the center of all this chaos. His hand moved to the side of the sofa, spread from him, only for it to rest on something soft. He raised an eyebrow at that, turning to look. "What the?" he said, yanking his hand back in shock, an action that caused giggles to ring through the room. The person beside him was none other than the rainbow-haired girl he had saved. And the soft thing he touched? None other than her bubbly cheeks. "Keep piling it up, Void." Ryuk growled, eyes shifting to the Void Nether now perched on his shoulder. The girl wasn't there when he sat down, and now she suddenly was? It was no doubt the handiwork of Void. "I'm just thinking it's a little impromptu, Ryuk." Void slithered from his right shoulder to the left. "What is it now, Void?" "Back there, in that dungeon of a prison, where those wretched souls were kept," Void began, his voice thick with mischief, as Elder Selene and Akasha's eyebrows twitched at his words. "A place where wretched souls are kept? Were they supposed to be one of those wretched souls? We were just seconds from escaping, and all of a sudden, you went, 'Do you hear that?' like a true madman, and suddenly disappeared. Next thing we saw, you were slicing open prison cages and letting out all the prisoners, while carrying one of them in your hands. I thought you were planning to use them as some form of scapegoat, but now that we're here, I'm wondering, why did you free them if they weren't going to be of use to you? Could you have turned good, Ryuk? Which will be really you, by the way. And what's with the rainbow girl? A lost daughter from some forsaken secret concubine of yours?" he added with a sinister smirk, whispering into Ryuk's ears like a little demon. But it didn't get to be demonic for long when Ryuk's palm suddenly shot out, grabbing onto Void's neck and squeezing tightly. "Help me!" Void screamed out for help, but none of them came to his rescue, giving Ryuk full freedom to ring the lecherous cat around. "You bastard! I asked you to stay by my side and wake me up at the slightest disturbance. And I wake up, in chains, You lecherous shit. That's what I get for trusting a lecherous rodent. Huh? Ryuk shouted, ringing the panther even faster. I never left your side. Void screamed, and Ryuk paused a bit, turning to Isha, who slowly shook her head. Kaya! Void screamed again when he felt the grip tighten around his neck, its life being wriggled out of him. You lying bastard! Ryuk growled, shaking the gasping neck even more violently. But to be fair, Rakshasa said softly, causing Ryuk to halt his grip a little. There was almost nothing we could have done to stop that from happening. It was inevitable. What do you mean? Ryuk asked. We had just finished refueling from our previous point, gotten all the resources we needed for the rest of the journey. Elder Selene was even able to navigate more of the map and found a couple of routes to the planetary port. Everything was peaceful, going well, when suddenly, everything was reduced to pitch darkness. Even the spaceship itself. Rakshasa's voice drew Ryuk's full attention. From the darkness, it seemed like some sort of domain expansion was activated, plunging everything into silence, even halting motion. When next we opened our eyes, the ship had been hijacked, and we were all bound in chains. Antares tried to fight back, but he was subdued by the one they called their boss. He was at the Exygnus stage, so there was nothing we could do. Even you were bound close to me, and there was nothing I could have done to wake you up, and Void was just as helpless as the rest of us too, she explained. Ryuk narrowed his eyes, looking back at Void, who smiled pleadingly. In the end, he decided to let it go. The panther instantly puffed away, collapsing on its back, coughing chaotically upon release, hand gripping its throat as it wheezed in pain. Humph! Ryuk humphed in satisfaction before he turned back to Rakshasa. Explain to me exactly what happened, he said, and in a couple of minutes he was up to date with everything that had happened during his slumber. The group had gotten down, refueled, and gathered their resources. They spent 3 days at the stop point, and once they were done, they picked up and continued on their journey. Elder Selene had previously mentioned 3 zones of danger they might encounter. The first was the Eid zone, which they had already survived. The second was a zone that had gained a reputation for frequent and unexplained disappearances. Unfortunately, they crossed paths with one such group, which succeeded in abducting them and taking them aboard their ship. Isa, a rare beast, a frost wyvern, had eventually been taken and experimented on, while the rest of them were locked away in prison cells. Void had managed to escape 7 times from his cell, but couldn't succeed in freeing the others, nor reach Ryuk before he was finally locked up in a light cage for good. Ryuk himself had been asleep through it all. As a result, he posed no threat, and thus they locked him away too. As for the reason why he had been locked far away from them, Elder Selene admitted that while he was unconscious, he was also releasing a powerful wave of energy that made the group wary of him. That was why he had been placed in a different area altogether, separate from the dungeon. When he woke up, they were already under attack by another group. That was how he had managed to rescue all of them, and how they were now here. So, the experience could be described as them overcoming the second challenge of their journey, and thankfully they had survived it. Still, Ryuk felt a bit of reluctance in his heart. A part of him wished he had stayed behind, to unleash vengeance on those who dared to reduce Isha to a mere specimen and keep them all locked away for months. But he also knew that if they hadn't escaped when they did, things might have gone wrong, leading to even greater regret. Besides, the group that had captured them was already being torn apart and destroyed by the other forces Ryuk had seen. He doubted they would survive that onslaught. How far off course have we veered? He asked Elder Selene, who pulled up a holographic map and showed it to Ryuk. He studied it with a focused glance, his eyes narrowing slightly. Actually, she began, we've been brought even closer to our goal. The location of that group surpassed the 3rd zone we were supposed to face. By abducting us, they also helped in navigating through the last danger. And now we're just a week away from reaching the planetary port. Ryuk hummed. Seems like we gained something from the chaos instead. They had crossed through the 3rd danger thanks to their captors, and now they were even closer to their destination. Good. he muttered under his breath. So, what's the deal with the girl? Rakshasa asked, pointing to the girl still asleep by his side. It's just like Void said. When we were about to dive into that portal, I heard a voice calling for help. It was also why I asked if any of you could hear it. He explained, and realization slowly dawned on their faces. I went deeper into the prison and found a place with an entire wall coated in the same iron used to forge your prison bars. You mean an entire wall of oblite or? Rakshasa asked, her eyes narrowing. Ryak nodded. Yes, she was locked within an entire wall of it, and there were suppressive runes everywhere. Even the chains used on her were covered in the same suppressive runes. Their eyes widened in shock as they turned to look at the girl. Rakshasa and Antares were both at the Apocrypha stage, and they had simply been locked behind bars made of that or. This little girl, before them, had been locked inside an entire wall of that or. And even the wall itself had been layered with another formation of suppressive runes. All of this, just to imprison a slumbering girl who looked too gentle to harm even a fly? I decided to save her in the end, Ryak continued as they hummed but thought. But why would you decide to save everyone else then? But I thought it would be unfair to save only her and leave the rest. So, to act fairly, I decided to break the remaining cages as well. And since she was slumbering while everyone else was escaping, I couldn't just leave her lying there, only for the building to eventually collapse on her and destroy the entire point of rescuing her. So I brought her along instead. I almost forgot she was even here, honestly. Ryak finished. Are you saying she's dangerous? A voice echoed from behind. Antares had come out of his room, now donning an iron-colored shirt and trousers. He came to stand behind Ryak, his eyes fixed on the sleeping girl. For her to have been trapped in that way, it was most likely because she was more of a horror than anything else. Something that was even more terrifying than they were, despite being at the Apocrypha stage, wasn't something they should just let lie around peacefully sleeping on a sofa. Her cute expression might just be a mask, one that could spell doom for all of them. She is, Ryak said plainly. The system had gravely warned him, and he had refused its advice. Something in his heart was telling him he would regret that decision, so he decided not to sugarcoat anything to the group about her. Well, you've already saved her. You don't plan on just throwing her into the depths of space, do you? Elder Selene said only to witness. Ryak's expression froze as he and Antares faintly brushed gazes with each other before quickly looking away. What the? You both were really planning on throwing her away? Elder Selene couldn't help but react, picking up the clues from both of them. To save a child from imprisonment, only to end up tossing her into the void of space? Even in her centuries of existence, she had never seen or heard of such a twisted idea before. Of course not. How could I do something so inhumane? Ryak said with a righteous expression, though all he got in return were suspicious gazes from the women in the room. Well then, what do we do with her? How about we keep her? The tiny voice echoed through the room, and Ryak's expression plummeted, but only for a second, bubbling back up when Isha fell into his embrace. Let's keep her, Ryak. Please, Isha begged, flashing puppy eyes at him. He almost couldn't resist. Almost. When he thought about their safety, he was able to push the idea down. Of course we will, Isha, he replied, to which a brilliant smile blossomed across her face. But only after we confirm she doesn't pose a threat to us, he added, and her expression dimmed a bit before she cutely humphed. I'm sure she won't, she said confidently, to which Ryak smiled triumphantly. I guess we'll all see about that when she wakes up, he replied. Isha remained resting over him as they all watched the girl stir a bit on the sofa, resulting in some strands of her rainbow hair splashing across Ryak's lap. Before Ryak could mutter a word, Isha's hands moved, pushing the hair away from Ryak's lap, while stretching herself in a way that made sure her own snow-white hair was the one covering his legs instead. That's one jealous frost hydra, the system said, making Ryak roll his eyes at the antic. She wants us to keep the girl, but won't even allow a strand of her hair to rest on me. So, Do we have a plan? He asked, turning to the others. Yes, Elder Selene replied. We continue our journey to the planetary port just like we started out. As for the Rainbow Girl, we'll decide whether to keep her based on how she reacts to us when she wakes up. Ryuk nodded. Good, he muttered under his breath. They had a clear goal and direction and were not wandering aimlessly. That alone was a relief. Eventually, Elder Selene rose and headed for her room, followed by Rakshasa, leaving just Antares on the sofa, attention wrapped on the device in his hands. Did you get new tattoos? Isha asked after the others were gone, as she looked at Ryuk's purple tattoos. Her hand gently brushed them. When she did, she was a bit surprised to see the purple tattoos suddenly shift into a color of white, accompanied by the coldness of frost. Huh! She gasped in surprise, her hand quickly retreating, and the tattoos shifted back to their previous purple. She tried again, her fingers running across his arm, only to watch it change to the same frosty color. And when she removed her hand again, it became purple once more. Wow! It's like they're changing to my frost aura, Isha exclaimed, turning to Ryuk, who smiled slightly. How did you do that? She asked. A new skill, he replied curtly. She returned her hand to his tattoos, running her fingers back and forth, watching the colors shift repeatedly, before finally stopping to ask something else. Hey, Ryuk, she said, her tone suddenly softer, like a whisper. When I got locked up by those people, I tried to return to the pet world, but somehow, it's like I've lost connection to it, she confessed, and Ryuk's eyebrows knitted a bit. And even now, I still can't access it. Why is that? She asked, turning to look at him. He could see it in her eyes. She was more worried about his well-being than she was about her inability to access the pet space. Ryuk started, trying to think of the best way to explain it to her and quell her worry. But then, another thought drifted into his mind. A dark voice echoed within him, rooting him in place. If you still had your bloodlines, she could have retreated into the pet space when she was captured. But because you didn't, she suffered. Her wings were torn off, her head severed. If you had arrived even a second later, perhaps all you might have found would her corpse. Isha went through pain and almost died, Ryuk, because of your pride. It is not pride, Ryuk suddenly shouted, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. Isha jerked back in shock, heading for the floor, but she didn't hit the floor before Ryuk's arms caught her. She was so close he could feel her heart pounding against his chest. It beat very fast, too fast, a silent sign of her fear, and in her confusion, ice crystals rained down on his shoulders, a silent sign of her tears. I'm sorry, Isha, he whispered, hugging her tighter. I never meant for you to go through harm, or any pain whatsoever. I'm sorry. Are you mad at me? She whispered, her eyes closing in pain. A pain that hurt more than her being imprisoned or experimented on. This pain assaulted her heart directly, and it stung. Her left hand folded into a tight fist. But then, another hand coiled around hers, unwrapping the clenched fingers and holding on to them. She felt the gentle touch on her face as he raised her chin, bringing her eyes to meet his. How could I be mad at you? He asked, as the ice crystals fell even faster. His fingers wiped away her tears. I love you more than I can put into words, Isha, he said, before leaning forward and gently pressing his forehead to hers. At the point where their skin met, a blue runic tattoo reappeared, one that had first manifested when Ryuk had first contracted Isha. The runic tattoo spread outwards across Isha's face, soon trailing down her entire body, while to Ryuk, it stretched deep into his eyes before vanishing within. The touch of their foreheads deepened as Isha embraced him tightly. I love you too, Ryuk, she whispered, her tears fading into snowflakes. Antares, who sat opposite the duo, had his device fall out of his hands in shock. He could hear it clearly, the sound of a heartbeat, two at first, But then they started to beat in perfect harmony, and soon enough there was only the sound of a single beat. His lips parted in shock. For just a moment, an illusion crossed his eyes. He saw Ryuk and Isha seemingly melt into one another, leaving just a single silhouette sitting on the sofa. They became one? With a wide-open mouth and hanging jaw, Antares witnessed it all. He watched as the sole figure sitting on the sofa slowly opened their eyes. His heart pounded rapidly as the illusion descended upon him. The illusion that he was being looked at not by one but by two people. Within Ryuk's simmering purple eyes, half of it was now covered in piercing blue. The same blue he remembered Isha possessing. Congratulations! Host has achieved 90% perfect fusion with Isha, the system announced. Ryuk raised his arm toward his face. On his body, he could see ice scales blooming outward, some even covering his cheeks, and his memories drifted back. That time when he had needed more skills, and the system had said, The second way is for the host's bond with Isha to increase. If host gains enough affinity with Isha, then there are limitless possibilities for growth. At the peak of host's bond with Isha, host's soul and Isha's soul will eventually merge as one. Host will even be able to fuse directly with Isha to become a single entity, and in such a state, host will become a half-ice serpent, and all of Isha's skills and abilities will be under host's control. He had done it. He had achieved something that he had been told was so rare and difficult that even imagining it had seemed impossible. But it wasn't just him. So, we fused. The voice echoed directly in Ryuk's head, but it didn't disturb his train of thought. It all just fit, as though it was meant to be there from the very beginning. It was Isha, and by how she had guessed the situation right, Ryuk could already tell she could hear his thoughts. It's amazing! Isha screamed out in his mind, as Ryuk's second hand lifted, twisting left and right under her control. So much power, she muttered, staring in awe at Ryuk's hand. So cold. Ryuk also muttered as he raised a single finger and watched the ice begin to spread forth. The very fabric of space around them began to ice into a sheath of white. But before it froze the entire room over, he stopped. Isha! Ryuk called out, closing his eyes for a few seconds before finishing. You're far too simple, he said with a smirk, and Antares watched as a pink hue appeared on Ryuk's cheeks. Why did you say that? She asked in a whimpering voice. All you really have in your head is just staying by my side, and your greatest wish is protecting me from all harm. Hey, don't go to my deep area, Isha cried out, and Ryuk grinned wickedly. Humph, then I'll check yours too, she said, as Ryuk's wicked grin immediately faded. You're so complex, she screamed in shock. Right now, deep within Ryuk's consciousness, was a figure clad in a frosty gown. This figure was none other than Isha. Before her stood a dozen large doors. 11 of those doors bore no markings, but one of them did. And above that door was a simple name, Ryuk, F.R. U. Ebnov /LL.com. Isha grabbed the knob and pulled. It was heavy, ridiculously so. But she pressed on and eventually succeeded. When she stepped in, her jaw dropped. Before her floated millions of fragments suspended within a purple void of space. Each of these fragments represented a part of Ryuk. His purposes, his motivations, his beliefs. There were so many that it rendered her immobile. She didn't even know where to begin. But she also never got the chance. She felt a force pull her from behind, and she was suddenly flung out of the door. When she opened her eyes again, it was to the side of Ryuk, his eyebrow quivering. You should have asked for permission before doing that, he grumbled. She turned away from him and sat on his legs, her face turned to the side. You never asked for mine before you checked either, she said with a spoiled pout. They separated? Antares observed, noticing how Isha had physically appeared once again. What he had just witnessed was something he'd never even heard of. A beast tamer, Ryuk, fusing completely with his own beast to become one? /n_oval.com. That wasn't just rare. It was legendary. He might just be beyond most beast tamers in this universe. At least beyond all the ones I've ever seen. Antares muttered to himself, a small smile growing on his lips. He picked up his device and began tapping away, even though his heart was still thumping loudly from the wonder he had just witnessed. But still, Ryuk, I can confirm you're not mad at me, Isha said, turning back to him. Of course, if he had held even a grain of anger toward her, their fusion never would have happened. I'm happy, she said, hugging him deeply once more. It lasted too long. Once again, they both began to sink into each other, until Isha eventually pulled away, a pink blush on her cheeks. So, it's activated with a hug. Huh. Ryuk muttered to himself before a light crisscrossed in his eyes. While not many hours had passed, it should already be approaching dawn in that place. Hey Isha, he called, and she blinked. I'll be going off to sleep, he said with a wry smile, one that even drew Antares' attention. He couldn't help but notice something, and that was that Ryuk's sleeping habits had become strange lately. Even during battles with invaders, Ryuk had been tied up and snoring like a baby. Antares wasn't petty enough to blame their abduction on Ryuk, but it was definitely eye-opening how often the guy had been asleep. Are you okay, Ryuk? He interrupted, turning toward him. All this sleeping and slumbering, it's a bit worrying and really unlike you, if I think about it. When he had first met Ryuk on Endearth, he had never seen him sleep, not even once. He was either cultivating or planning something. Sleep was never a part of Ryuk's world. But now, especially on this journey, he was constantly dozing off. Anytime there was a group discussion, he was usually absent because he was asleep. It wasn't normal, and Antares felt compelled to ask. Maybe because he's a weird beast? The words echoed out as a figure stepped through the door. It was none other than Elder Selene, a shawl around her white hair, which held sparkles of white drops of water hanging from their ends. He's a weird beast? Antares asked as he turned to her, watching her nod while she sat on the sofa. I can feel it, the blood in my veins quivering from his existence, and I can more than sense a hint of beastly familiarity with him, she muttered, and Ryuk smiled wryly. What Elder Selene described was what she truly felt. Even now, sitting before Ryuk, her beastly blood was roiling in her veins, flowing faster. The sensation was something she had read usually happened when a beast encountered another beast, not just any, but one with a purer bloodline or a bloodline higher in the beastly hierarchy. If she'd had any doubt before whether Ryuk was a beast or not, now she had none at all. Even we frost wyverns need to occasionally enter a sleeping state to conserve energy. Although it doesn't happen erratically like his, it's more ordered. Still, slumbering is part of our life. I'm guessing it's now becoming part of his too, she said, to which Antares hummed. Elder Selene's words made sense, and he turned to Ryuk, who nodded, deciding to play along. True, merely staying awake drains energy from me. So to conserve more energy and regain it back, sleeping is a good way for me. It's my new energy-conserving mode, he explained, and Antares asked, any way to stop you from dozing off here and there? Then, make it more like the frost wyvern slumber, where you only sleep at specific times and stay awake longer. Ryuk slowly nodded. Maybe there might be in the future when I familiarize myself with this new power. But for now, I don't have much choice, he replied, and Antares eventually nodded. When the girl wakes up, I'll wake you too, Antares called, and Ryuk gave a grateful nod before turning to Isha, who chirped, nighty-nighty, and Ryuk's head slowly dropped to the side, his body slumping onto the armrest of the chair. But Isha caught him, gently carrying him in her arms and laying him on another sofa, sparing him from an uncomfortable crumpled state. Ah! An exhale slipped from Ryuk's lips as he opened his eyes to the image of a white ceiling above his head. His head slowly turned, his gaze drifting to the window where the sun's rays were just starting to dust the sky in a soft orange. "It's morning already," he murmured, rising from under the mattress. "I'm glad that got fixed. Thank you, system." He had expected that Void would wake him if anything went wrong, and assumed everything was fine. But who could have guessed the group had already been abducted? Only under the system's pestering had he finally decided to check on them, and that turned out to be a good decision. It was a night well spent. Congratulations! Host has completed the secret quest. Save the abducted group from captivity. Rewards: 1. Plus 8 million EXP. 2. Plus 3 level up cards. 3. Plus 50 ability upgrade cards. Even nicer, Ryuk muttered to himself as he rose to his feet and headed for the bathroom to prepare for the day. 30 minutes later, he stepped out, donning a new set of clothes, with the unkempt aura around him having dispersed. He had chosen his favorite, a simple white shirt and trousers, but to look a bit more official, he wore something that had touches of blue, a knee-length coat over the dress. It was enough to make the outfit feel less plain and more refined. It was around 6 o'clock in the morning. He still had plenty of time, and for now, he could browse through the array of missions in the Archguard access comms he'd been given by Officer Reese. Sitting on the bed, a tiny beam of gold appeared in the depths of his eyes. Soon enough, the panel flashed open. He navigated to the Archguard comms, but just before he could reach the quest area, he noticed a message icon with a red 1 badge blinking over it. "Seems like I've received a message, but from who?" When he opened it up, he was a bit surprised. Archguard messaging tab. Messenger, Officer Reese. Message: "Hey Ryuk, just received the news of your mission completion. Seems like you did very well. A positive review from one of the royals is very rare, but you got yours from your first mission with them. Good, very good." Ryuk raised an eyebrow. "What's that fatty up to this time?" Message: "I found a new mission for you, which I thought would be just perfect. You can, of course, refuse it. As your commanding officer, I can only force you to perform a single mission of mine, which you already completed. All others are up to you. But I think this mission will be the next best step after such a successful first run. If you're interested, then come to the office. 8 o'clock sharp. Don't you dare keep me waiting." It ended, and Ryuk's expression knitted. "This doesn't make sense. He gave me the first mission recommendation, but the review was posted on my page, and the extra money went into my account. All in all, it seemed like I was the only one who gained something from the mission, not him. So why would he be so enthusiastic for me if he's not getting anything out of it himself? Could he really just be a good, well-wishing guy?" He wondered, but the thought of the fatty instantly made him dispel the idea. No way in hell is he a well-wishing guy. There's definitely something in it for him. Ryuk muttered as he moved away from the message tab, quickly navigating around the interface. Soon enough, he got his answer. A sleek smile creeping over his face. "Just as I thought. He truly gains something from me completing the missions." Ryuk concluded, reading over the characteristics of a commanding officer tab, which also described how their levels grew. Characteristics of a commanding officer. The commanding officer is an official and higher hierarchy of the Amamran service responsible for leadership and mission coordination. The leveling up of a commanding officer is based on merits, something that grows further through the successful completion of missions assigned to them. Regardless of which Archguard chooses the mission, as long as the missions listed under the commanding officer are completed, the officer gains merit points that boost their chances of leveling up and receiving a promotion. This was the exact reason why, when Ryuk completed the mission given to him by Officer Reese, he had reportedly done it well. That mission had been part of Officer Reese's assigned mission list from the organization. Because Ryuk completed it so perfectly, Officer Reese must have gained a lot of merit points, contributing toward his own promotion. Now, knowing Ryuk's potential, it made sense that he'd send him on another mission, hoping Ryuk could pull it off again and earn him even more merit points. So Officer Reese wasn't helping out of kindness. He was helping for the merit points. "TSK, that fatty bastard," he muttered, clicking his tongue in displeasure. For a second, he had almost been charmed, telling himself perhaps one cannot truly judge a book by its cover. But then he hummed a bit, his thoughts shifting. I think this is actually good. He finds me one-of-a-kind missions. Loyalty quests that offer a higher than usual amount of AMA points, hence boosting me up the rankings and pushing me faster toward the next level. And in return, he earns himself more merit points from my actions. That looks like a beneficial association rather than one where only one side gains, leading the other to grow suspicious of their true motives or feeling indebted. Now that I know why he's helping me, it doesn't mean I'm not being helped. If anything, it removes any guilt from my conscience. And if he assigns me a quest, he'll be the one setting up the extra info I need and organizing how I get to the location. Something I'd have to do myself if I were taking it solo. This is more good than bad. He proceeded to click the reply panel. Count me in, he typed before the panel disappeared, just as he heard approaching footsteps near his door. Giving one last look in the mirror and nodding at his appearance, he reached for the door, twisted the knob and stepped out, only to find Mrs. Linnea on the stairway. You're up early, she said. Ryuk smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Linnea. Morning, Ryuk. Breakfast's ready, she said, to which he nodded and followed her downstairs. 30 minutes later. Well, seems like the old man's horses are here, Ryuk said, turning to old Jack, whose jaw hung open, eyes tired and unfocused. These damn bastards. At least let me eat in peace. Why come so early? Jack cursed under his breath, stuffing a couple more dish into his mouth. Although he wanted more, the horses suddenly seemed to have caught a neighing disease, honking loudly and endlessly, leaving old Jack no choice but to scurry from the table. Damn bastards! Just give me a sec! He screamed through the window, but their reply was, TCH. Clicking his tongue in dissatisfaction, he wiped his mouth with a tissue. There's a lot of money in the account now. You could get something to eat at work, Mrs. Linnea said, giving him a goodbye hug. It was enough to soften old Jack's angry expression. Of course, love, he said. I'll be back home early, honey. I promise. He quickly raced out of the room, jumping into the carriage, which immediately trotted into the distance. He, Ryuk chuckled mischievously, looking at the remaining dishes in front of him. Since old Jack had woken up late, he had barely been able to eat 5 pieces of the dish. Now the remaining 25 or so were all his. He immediately began diving in, but just as he was about to dip another morsel into his mouth, Mrs. Linnea suddenly spoke up. And speaking of a lot of money in the account, she said, and Ryuk's hand froze mid-air, his eyes shifting toward her. Does being an archguard really pay that much on the first day? Mrs. Linnea asked, coming to sit at the dining table exactly opposite him. She elegantly grabbed a knife and fork. Or, you're up to something else that makes a lot of money, she added, dipping a chunk of meat and turning to look at Ryuk with probing eyes. Something like what? Ryuk asked casually. A light flashed from Elder Celine's panel as she called forth her comms, showing a screen to Ryuk. He skimmed through it quickly, and by the time he reached the end, a glint of amusement sparkled in his eyes. The panel she showed was a job listing. The requirements. Extremely handsome, at the Aporikva stage or higher. The pay was insane. 250,000 ammo notes per week. And oddly enough, the job seemed tailor-made for someone like Ryuk, making him even more amused. You think I might have signed up for that? He asked, raising an eyebrow as the panel disappeared, recalled back to her. No, I don't. I saw the alert of 300,000 ammo notes entering the account, and just when I was about to smile, I received a notification of that exact job listing, literally less than 3 seconds later. It was unsettling, she added. I understand. But here's what I did, Ryuk said, bringing up his own panel for her to see. She read it. A loyalty quest to serve as personal guard to a royal house princess, and the pay is 5,000 ammo points and 200,000 ammo notes, she asked. Ryuk nodded and the panel disappeared. They also offered a bit more for being satisfied with the loyalty quest, so I was able to send 300,000 instead of 200,000. I'm sorry, she apologized, but Ryuk shook his head gently. No, I don't feel offended at all about receiving such a large sum of money. I'm glad you brought it up right away, instead of silently having doubts about what I was doing. Ryuk replied with a reassuring smile. And I'm glad you understand. Also, thank you very much. That more or less covers the entire expenses of the family for 3 months. And definitely even more, she said with a beaming smile. Ryuk nodded back with a small smile. The familiar cawing echoed through the window as both turned to see the Ammonius waiting for him outside. His ride was here. 10 minutes before 8 o'clock. You're quite punctual. The words of praise echoed through the cluttered office, where piles upon piles of books were stacked across a massive desk. Behind the desk sat the familiar figure of a short, big-bellied, angelic man. It was none other than Officer Reese, who looked up at the door as a young man stepped inside. That young man was Ryuk. I could say the same for you, he replied, making his way further into the office and taking a seat opposite Reese. Of course. As the boss of the organization, I can only teach punctuality by being early myself. Reese boomed with a proud laugh, making Ryuk realize the man was, as always, fanning his own ass. That aside, I see you showed interest in the mission? Reese asked, leaning forward, fingers wrapping into the others. Let me confirm from you now that you're truly interested in it, he said, leaning forward slightly to stare at Ryuk directly in the eye. I'm up for it, Ryuk replied without hesitation, something that genuinely surprised Reese. A flicker of light passed through the officer's eyes. He sounds too confident for someone unlucky enough to cross paths with an occult group on his first day of work. And yet, on his second day, he's ready for a mission he hasn't even heard the details of, Reese thought. But he didn't let the doubt show on his face, nor impede him from making his decision. Only a certain group of people usually showed such a lackadaisical attitude, the stupid or the genius. Both were always interesting to command. I don't know if you've heard, Reese began, but there's a disappearance case amongst the Archguards. Ryuk's eyes narrowed. And what's more, these kidnappings have mostly happened to people like you, foreigner Archguards, compared to the angelic ones, Reese added. They go on missions and never return. Ryuk frowned. And you're sure they didn't just lose their lives during the mission? The mission he went through yesterday would have killed any ordinary Archguard. If the assassins had killed him and taken his body, wouldn't that have just been considered a failed mission instead of an abduction? We've confirmed it in more than 45 scenarios, Reese said firmly. The Archguard we sent never even reached their destination before they were tagged missing, and all communication with them was lost. And in some cases, they reportedly completed their mission and left the mansion, only for them to never return to base and confirm completion. This has happened nearly 70 times now. All efforts from the organization to track them down have failed, one cold trail after another. Ryuk hummed in thought as Reese continued. Up until 3 days ago, when we finally got a clue. A tracker was left on one of the missing Archguards. Of course, he was abducted, nowhere to be found like the others. But we were able to trace the location where the tracker stopped transmitting. He paused and activated a holographic display that appeared in front of Ryuk. The image showed Amora, a circular golden ball, and orbiting around it were several tiny planetary spheres. But away from all of them, in a far-off, isolated space, was a dark, lonely sphere of black light. That world is called Nihility, Reese declared almost grandly. Ryuk's eyes gleamed. Nihility? Legend says that the world once held the remnants of a powerful dark race. It used to be twice as large as the current Amora, Reese explained, eyes glinting with mystery. Twice as big, Ryuk echoed. You heard right, he said with a nod, but then the glow in Ryuk's eyes dimmed just as it came. If it's twice as big as Amamora, why does it look so small on the holograph then? Because a catastrophic ancient battle took place there that made the world lose about 70% of its mass. Now it's desolate, A place where no grass grows and no sunlight ever reaches. Some say it's cursed. Others claim it places curses on all who dare enter, he added. Ryuk raised an eyebrow. If it curses everyone who enters, then wouldn't the rescue team end up cursed too? I don't believe in superstitions, Reese said quickly. Of course you don't. You're not the one going in, Ryuk scoffed mentally. But if there's one thing that's certain, Reese continued, it's that all of the missing archguards somehow, one way or another, ended up in that world. It's where the tracker signal was lost. And before the connection broke, we sensed more signals, ones that could only belong to other archguards. That planet is where they're being held, without a doubt. Ryuk's gaze sharpened. So what's the quest? The quest is to go there with a team of 15 experts, divided into 3 groups. Each group is to scour the planet in search of the missing archguards. If the team of 15 brings back any important clues regarding the missing personnel, each member earns 3,000 ammo points. But if you're successful and actually bring the missing archguards back alive, each of the team members will be rewarded with 15,000 ammo points. And the group that finds and brings them back personally, they'll be given 30,000 ammo points each, Officer Reese declared. Ryuk hummed thoughtfully. His previous mission, escorting someone, was worth 5,000 ammo points, significantly higher than the base 3,000 here. But if the missing archguards were truly trapped on that planet and they managed to rescue them, then that 3,000 would turn to 15,000. And if he happened to be on the team that located and rescued them directly, that was a whopping 30,000 ammo points, 6 times the value of his previous mission. A very tempting offer. And he knew the pay for such a mission wouldn't be something he could imagine. Searching for lost people in a cursed world. Huh? Ryuk thought, a slow grin coiling on his lips. Count me in, he said boldly. Officer Reese smiled brilliantly. I knew you weren't the type to back off. Then let's not waste any more time. Your group is already complete, and you're the last person they're waiting for. A group of 4 stood on a green grass area. Behind them an ultra-gigantic, sleek black aircraft. Something about the scene surprised him. He knew Amamura never used technological artifacts like the spaceship before him. But before he could dwell too long on that point, he finally arrived before the group of 4, Officer Reese beside him, who waved cheerfully. This won't end nicely. That was the first thought that occurred in Ryuk's head as he appeared before them. The reason he didn't think it would end well? It was because all 4 people were archguards, but unlike him, who was a foreigner archguard, they were true angelic archguards. 2 of them had their brows scrunched up in displeasure upon seeing Ryuk. Another had his mouth opened in an O, while the last, the only female in the group, wore the most deadpan expression Ryuk had ever seen on a living being. Very sorry to keep you waiting, Officer Reese said. But before he could say more, he was cut short. Don't tell me this is him? A male archguard, the tallest in the group, standing at an exceptional height of 4 meters and towering over Ryuk by almost double his size, stepped forward, stopping just half a meter before him. He is, Officer Reese replied. While he might look immature, I can assure you, he's the perfect. How many missions has he completed? The man asked, cutting off Officer Reese, still staring down at Ryuk. He just resumed yesterday, but he did his. So not only does he look immature, he is immature? The man finished, turning to look at Officer Reese, who tried to say something in defense. But those piercing golden eyes alone were enough to silence him, making him forget what he even wanted to say. The tall angelic archguard turned back to Ryuk before bending down to his level. Just to make sure you get this right. So, we're all going on a loyalty quest to find a group of lost foreigner archguards, he said, pausing. Ryuk nodded once and replied through his nose. Aha! And you are a foreigner archguard? He asked. Ryuk nodded twice, replying again, Aha! Aha! The man paused, his brow furrowing. Ryuk's tone seemed childish, but leaned more toward obvious mockery. Still, the man continued. And you're sure you get the math? This time Ryuk nodded thrice before replying with, Aha! A faint chuckle came from the side, from none other than Officer Reese, who found the situation more amusing than he should. But he quickly received a deadly stare and was instantly silenced. "You know what?" the tall angel said, rising back up as he extended a hand forward. "Welcome to the team. I'm Grosk," he said. Ryuk smiled. A sweet, innocent smile that, thanks to his beautiful face, looked even sweeter. "And I'm Ryuk," he replied, taking the handshake firmly before eventually letting go. "Then I'll be sure to aim downwind, Grosk. Wouldn't want your sensitive nose to pass out before we even get to Nihility," Ryuk replied, clearly taunting him, but in such a naive and innocent tone that no one among them could call it disrespect. "See you, Officer Reese," Ryuk said with a wave, climbing onto the ship as the hatch soon closed up. The last thing he saw was Officer Reese waving back. "I'll be waiting here to receive you once you're back," the fatty called out with a loud shout as the hatch shut closed. But that only saved him from the loud snort that rang through the ship after his words. Once he's back, TSK. His chances of survival are nil if the Nihility is as described, the Archguards thought in their hearts. Unlike Elder Selene's aircraft, which was so large it had a living room and extra rooms inside, this spacecraft only had a large cockpit lit by golden lights and exactly 5 seats. The lady, who had yet to say a word or display any emotion, took the foremost seat directly in front of the aircraft consoles. Right behind her were 2 seats where Grosk and another burly man sat. Behind those 2 seats was Ryuk's own seat on the right, and beside him sat the last member of the group, an Archguard who was eye-catching due to his short height of about 2.3 meters and a lean body. Ryuk turned to him for a moment, watching as the man raised his hand and waved at him with a smile that couldn't exactly be called a friendly one. It seemed more like a mocking grin, but who was Ryuk to not respond to such a well-wishing gesture? He also raised his hand and waved back, flashing the same innocent smile, and that alone was more than enough to make Mason's eyes faintly twitch. Is he really as dumb as he looks? Or is this all just a facade? Somehow, I feel like the latter is more accurate. Strap up. We'll be leaving for Nihility in 10, 9. The countdown from the ship's AI rang out as Ryuk turned to his side, finding 3 seat belts. He didn't waste much time, slashing 1 seat belt over his waist, which locked him to the chair, then sliding the remaining 2 diagonally across his body, tightly securing himself. It didn't take long before the sound of the awakening engine rang out in his ears, followed by the surge of waves that rippled outward from the underside and backside of the ship. Under the watch of Officer Reese, the sleek black jet slowly hovered upwards before it suddenly rushed into the skies. It disappeared like a phantom, mingling with the gray clouds and soon completely exiting Amamora's atmosphere before vanishing into the darkest depths of space. "I really hope he returns safely," Officer Reese mused to himself, looking at the place where the ship had once been. But then he added, "If he does, I can finally reach halfway through the merit points enough for my promotion." He completed with a beaming smile, soon walking away from the scene. "We're getting closer to Nihility. Just 2 hours away." Grosk's update came from the front, ringing through the entire ship, even to the ears of Ryuk and Mason, who sat at the far back. They had been seated silently for 16 hours now, as the ship continued its journey. "We've already spent 16 hours just on the journey alone. It's clear this won't be a one-day mission," Ryuk mused silently to himself. A moment later, a tiny beam emerged from his eyes, resulting in his ammo comms appearing before him. "I should inform Mrs. Linnea I won't be returning home for the night, lest she become worried," he thought, his hands quickly moving to the keyboard panel that appeared in front of him as he typed a quick message and clicked send. The message should have normally been carried forward instantly, but this time it continuously loaded and lagged for about 30 seconds before finally being sent. "The service is also disappearing the closer we get to Nihility. Or should I say, the farther we are from Amora. I'm guessing that once we reach Nihility, there'll be no way to send or receive messages from Amora," he realized, sending another message which took about 3 minutes before it finally went through. With that done, he dispersed the comms and turned to look around the room. There had been a couple of exchanges between the group when the journey first began, and from that, Ryuk had eventually come to learn a few things about the group he was with. The most eye-catching and mysterious was the silent woman piloting the ship. She never spoke more than a or no, and her name was Auraniel. From the way the group addressed her, Ryuk could easily tell she was most likely the strongest among them, or someone with a powerful background that warranted the immense respect she received. Still, her cultivation base wasn't something he could sense at all. Looking at her was like staring into a black hole. It gave one the sense of nothing, yet everything. There was no doubt she was stronger than he in his current basic state, far stronger. Perhaps, if he activated his Beyonder Dragon skill, then he would be able to pinpoint exactly what her cultivation base was. Even though she was respected and, hypothetically, the strongest, she wasn't the leader of the group. That position went to Grozk, the one who had questioned him about his capability earlier. He was the one who shared the knowledge of nihility and warned them what to watch out for, such as abductors pretending to be the psychopathic tourists that occasionally visited nihility. It might be a desolate world, but that only seemed to attract the interest of certain types of people, making it easy for abductors to pretend to be tourists and lure targets. Grozk knew the most about nihility. Dangerous zones, rumors of what happened in the past and what was happening now, various legends and superstitions, even pathways and the locations of important sites within nihility. He was knowledgeable, and just like Auraniel, the group also seemed to greatly respect him. His aura radiated leadership, and he was most likely the second strongest in the group. Just like Auraniel, Ryuk also couldn't sense his cultivation base, a clear signal that the man was stronger than him in his current state. The third in the group was a burly angel called Gus. One glance at him reminded Ryuk of Officer Reese. Fat, lazy-looking, and blunt. His droopy eyes and blank stare gave off the vibe of someone who wouldn't care if the world ended, or what even caused its end in the first place. He radiated that, "I just can't be bothered and I'd rather blankly stare into nothingness" type of energy. But even though he looked lazy, he didn't look weak at all. He was broad-shouldered, and the space around him seemed compressed, as if a heavy force surrounded him just from sitting in that chair. Even the chair creaked slightly lower to the ground than the others. It was a sign of heavy brute strength. And just like the rest, Ryuk also couldn't pinpoint his cultivation, meaning Gus was most likely stronger than him, too. As for the last in the group, it was the one sitting next to him. Mason. Lanky and thin, with disheveled golden hair, sunken golden eyes, and dark eye bags. He radiated the energy of a rat, nervous and twitchy. His fingers tapped constantly against the seat, and his eyes never stayed in one place for long. His thoughts were unreadable, yet his body language screamed unease. He was the cunning type, most likely to go for a dirty all-is-allowed brawl rather than a fair boxing match. Right now, his fingers were on the seat, lazily drawing something with his nail, even though there was nothing to be seen. He was the only one whose cultivation Ryuk could deduce. Early stage of Exignis. One could say he was just as strong as Ryuk in his current state, and the weakest in the group. Somehow makes his nervous attitude more reasonable. He thought silently before his gaze drifted back forward. He still had a quest completed and had yet to properly access it. So he ordered in his mind, "Activate system interface. Congratulations! The host has completed the secret quest. Save the abducted group from captivity. Rewards plus 8 million EXP, plus 3 level-up cards, plus 50 ability upgrade cards. System Interface 2.0. Name Ryuk Null. Race, Beyonder Dragon. Age 18. Level, 189. DXP, 109,92000/36 million. Level up cards 3. Used level up cards? Yes. -1 level up card used. Host has leveled up to level 190. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. -1 level up card used. Host has leveled up to level 191. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. -1 level up card used. Host has leveled up to level 192. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. Level up cards left, 0. Attribute panel. Physical dominance, 10,000. Velocis 10,000. Core stability 10,000. Mimetic awakening 10,000. Cosmic gravitas 5,000. Attribute points, 300. Use attribute points? Not yet, he replied as the system panel disappeared. Hopefully, I can harvest a lot of EXP and quests on Nihility, he muttered inwardly as the group made their way closer to the Dark Realm. Nihility, a world dark, a world scarred. The ship tore through the black atmosphere, but what painted it was a crimson hue, one whose source was none other than the crimson red moon that hung right in the center of the world, casting the color of blood onto the dark landscape below. Still, the dark spacecraft descended onto the ground with no problem, and soon enough the hatch opened. They all began stepping out, including Ryuk, whose gaze first went upward toward the crimson moon in the sky. It was a full moon of deep, pulsing red, and the entire world below was coated in its eerie glow. He sniffed the air, and his nose scrunched up slightly as a panel flashed before his eyes. Warning: large presence of toxic poisoning detected in the airspace. Effects: irrelevant to the host's health, but prolonged exposure may lead to lung irritation. Turning his gaze away, he looked down at the ground beneath him. It was rocky and hard, and with narrowed eyes, he noticed the dark, shadow-like steam that escaped the ground like mist. The aura was haunting in nature, and there wasn't even the faintest sign of life around them. Truly a nice place to abduct people and never be discovered, he muttered under his breath, turning back to the group, just in time to see Auraniel stretch her hand toward the gigantic ship. A beam of light emanated, and what followed made Ryuk's hair stand on end. What the hell? From Auraniel's outstretched palm, a slit suddenly appeared, and from within that slit, something suddenly burst forth. A gigantic maw from what seemed like a worm-like creature emerged and wrapped around the ship, just like a python swallowing prey. It happened incredibly fast, the entire ship vanishing in a single gulp before the strange creature violently withdrew itself back into the slit in her palm. Closed right after, but still left golden fluid dripping down from it. And when it the hardened earth, the dark steam surrounding it was instantly erased, followed by a sizzling scorch on the ground itself before the fluid dispersed completely. Is that some sort of storage ring? Ryuk couldn't help but wonder, but his attention was pulled back by the sound of a throat being cleared. Hum. Grozg warmed his throat, drawing the attention of the group before turning to the side and stretching out his palm. From within it, a holograph emerged. The total number of people deployed on this mission is 15. We were split into 3 groups, each consisting of 5 archguards. This is done for good reason. Nihility has 3 main directional paths, rather than the normal 4, he explained. Ryuk glanced around him. That's weird. There's an east, north, west, and south around me, and the guy says there are 3. The first group has taken the north. The second took the west. We've been assigned to take the south, which is... He paused, and the holograph of a gigantic compass appeared in the air. The staff in its center spun around. Ryuk noticed something odd. It didn't seem to be able to move toward the east, confirming Grozg's words. It only rotated along north, west, and south before finally pausing directly on the path labeled south. It was the path on Ryuk's right, and the group turned toward it. Our mission is simple. We continue down south as far as we can, until we arrive at the edge of Nihility. Also, Nihility doesn't loop, since it's broken. If we walk far enough, we'll reach the edge of space, Grozg said as the compass and holograph disappeared. If we find anything amiss, we investigate. If we find nothing, we report that we found nothing and return to Amora. It's as simple as that. Let's get going. The group began moving, but Grozg stopped when he noticed no footsteps behind him. He turned only to find Ryuk still standing there. What is it now, Ryuk? Don't tell me you're already growing cold feet, Grozg said with a devilish grin. But Ryuk shook his head. No, the ground isn't cold. I just can't be the only one thinking. Since we're just going to be walking south anyway, why withdraw the ship? He asked. The group raised an eyebrow. It's faster than walking, can fly high in the air, which offers a little more comfort. Instead of wasting energy marching forward, the ship feels more reasonable, he deduced aloud. Grozk turned to Oraniel, who simply shook her head once. The ship belongs to Oraniel, Grozk replied. And the deal was for it to get us to Nihility, not within Nihility. Ryuk's eyebrows twisted slightly. She can't be that stingy, can she? Besides, Grozk continued, being in the ship, up in the air, might make us miss important clues that walking on the ground could reveal. The enemies might be lurking underground, hidden within random mountains, or may have left behind footsteps or signs of their presence. We wouldn't be able to see those if we were floating in the comfort of a ship. Also, it would be harder to react to surprise attacks. Staying in the ship makes us more vulnerable instead, he explained. Something he couldn't help but find reasonable. A bit. So, no ship. We use our legs and spread out our senses for any clues, Grozk concluded as they all began releasing their divine senses to sweep the surrounding terrain. It was like a cultivation radar, something Ryuk also possessed, when he still had access to his full cultivation. But he no longer did, and hurricane energy doesn't come with a divine sense passive skill. For that reason, Grozk began eyeing him. Noticing Ryuk didn't unleash his divine sense. I don't have a divine sense, he eventually admitted. The man raised an eyebrow. Even those at the Eternity stage possessed a divine sense, and Grozk could tell Ryuk was at least at the Apocrypha stage. Still, it was an opportunity to finally jab the arrogant kid's prideful nose. So you're saying you're useless even on a simple radar aspect of the mission, huh? Grozk asked with a grin. No, I didn't say that, you did, Ryuk replied as Grozk's upper eyebrows knitted. This damn kid really getting on my nerves. He silently swore to himself, but just before he could reply, the words echoed out through the group, shocking many of them. The one who spoke was none other than Oraniel. We all have 4 divine senses spread out already, she said, turning her golden gaze to Grozk. Having one more additional or less would make no difference. She ended. She's supporting him? Was the thought that first echoed in Grozk's head. Is that a silent jab at me? Was the thought that echoed in Ryuk's. Also, she continued, pausing the thought in his head. We focus on the loyalty mission, and hence all that helps towards achieving it. Anything else is of no importance and could act as an impediment factor, she said while turning back and resuming her walk. And that also includes both of your childish skirmishes. She completed her task, leaving both Ryuk and Grozk in a state of shocked stupor. The group eyed the two of them once, snickering in mockery before they followed after the back of the disappearing Oraniel. This leaves just Ryuk and Grozk standing frozen behind. Their gazes drifted to the other before Grozk humphed, following after the group. Ryuk paused for a moment, turning to look at the crimson moon in the sky while silently determining in his heart. I think I've truly played around enough. This is the time to focus on the reason why I came here. He muttered to himself, closing his eyes for a couple of seconds. Silence was all he met with first, but then he started opening it. His ears began twitching, and his nose faintly scrunched up. They began coming from a distance, all sounds being made in a radius of about a kilometer, but it never ended. It only kept spreading and spreading as he picked up each of these sounds. After a couple of minutes, silently pausing and listening, he finally heard it. A sound that seemed different than most. It was like the sound of something faintly knocking on the wall, or like a tool slamming into a rock, seemingly in carving. It was a clear sign that whatever it was most definitely something's conscious act. A beast? Or one of those tourists, perhaps? He could not identify until he spread out his senses of smell, sniffing in the air. The sound was the thread that bound it, bringing his smell forward. When it finally reached the end, and Ryuk took a sniff, his eyes immediately snapped open. The smell. Blood. He thought to himself, and a moment later, he silently faded away from where he stood, the dark mist trailing on the ground billowing away in a rising circle 5 seconds after his disappearance. He has stopped. Mason noticed, turning his back to look at Ryuk standing behind them, bathed by the crimson moonlight. Hey Grosk, you sure we want to live the kid? He was saying when Grosk waved. If he wants to stay behind, then so be it. Not like he'll be of much use anyway. Grosk said with a tired shrug of his shoulder. Just like Oraniel had said, it was time to focus on the mission, and 4 of them were more than enough for it. He couldn't care less about the ignorant boy anymore. But just a moment later, they witnessed as Oraniel paused in her tracks, looking to her side. The group followed her gaze, and just for a second, they saw the figure that flashed past them like a phantom, silently fading away with speed. Ryuk! Grosk muttered, but then saw as Oraniel suddenly resumed running after the boy. Without a word being said, they all quickly followed after, moving forward with speed, with Ryuk in the lead. A moment later, and they were in a vast mountainous field. It was a strangely bizarre place as fragments of broken rocks lay on the ground, their source none other than from those sky-piercing mountains that have been reduced to half their height and majesty. Some of them were high enough to become obstacles, but the group marched forward unrelentingly, shattering all in their path. It's closer, Ryuk muttered, closing his eyes and taking in a breath. He could smell the blood, and it was thickening in its aura. Soon enough, he watched as Oraniel appeared by his side, having caught up to him. Which direction? She asked him, her voice colder than ice, but Ryuk paid no attention to it. The nauseous smell was spreading, and he simply pointed in the direction where he could sense the thickening blood concentration. A moment later, and he stood in surprise as Oraniel suddenly disappeared from his sight as if she never existed. What the? He cursed only for a powerful hurricane of golden to slam into him from the side, almost blowing him off his feet. Such power and speed, he thought, looking forward to seeing her back quickly disappearing, and soon it was completely out of his gaze. For the correct order, please visit. She really is a monster, he muttered as he also picked up his speed, although the group also soon came to arrive by his side with some, like Grosk, surpassing him by 500 meters. It was a clear reminder to Ryuk just how much the difference between him and them was, although he didn't feel an oppressed feeling in his heart. Instead, he felt the flame of completion realigned within him, just before it could inflame and consume him. Kaboom! An explosion of golden energy, along with a bizarre crimson energy, exploded into the sky and quickly enough. Kaboom! 3 more explosions followed after. The group was quick to arrive at the scene. A scene of chaos with weird beings Ryuk had never seen before. Crimson demons. Grosk's words rang out, torn between a faint mix of shock and disgust. Without a word being uttered, the group shot forward towards the dozen of these weird entities.